For me, one of the keys to life is the inner voice, that constant inner dialogue we all have. In other words, women have it on a constant loudspeaker, while men have it a bit softer and occasionally in silence. But we all have an inner voice. If we pay attention, we realize that we constantly judge or analyze things. Even in the midst of a conversation, we might be thinking, this, then that, and what about Andres? Marion came, and we're analyzing and talking about it. Many times, it's neutral, just describing what's happening. It's like a radio commenting on things. The problem arises when that voice turns inward, and suddenly it's focused on us. It starts saying, you've gained weight, your boss doesn't pay attention to you, your partner is distant, you're not making progress in life, you're stuck, you've made mistakes, how could you trust this person or this situation? That's the most harmful thing that exists in the brain, the most terrible thing, actually. I'm not reading the book right now, and it's quite entertaining. When I published Como Hacer, KTE Pasan Cosas Buenas, How to Make Good Things Happen, I used to say that attitude is the inner voice. It's the attitude you have in life. For example, you're going for a job interview, and the inner voice says, maybe they'll hire you, or maybe they'll reject you, or what if something bad happens? What if you get nervous and can't speak? The consequence of this is your attitude. You face life according to how your inner voice treats you. If you go somewhere, and your inner voice suddenly says, you're not going to meet anyone, it's embarrassing, you should stay home, you'll look ridiculous, your whole body goes into alert mode, and we know that alert mode means cortisol, telomeres, microbiota, inflammation. In other words, it disrupts everything. There's a part of the brain I haven't talked about much, the prefrontal cortex. I've read a lot about it and studied it extensively. It's the area responsible for attention, concentration, problem solving, and impulse control. It makes us superior beings in terms of information management. Imagine you're walking through a restaurant or sitting in one, and your food hasn't arrived yet, but the person next to you has a dish they haven't started eating. You start thinking, should I take it? What if I don't take it? You don't take it, not just because of manners but also because of impulse control. Your brain allows you to think and say, no, I shouldn't. That inner voice, when I published my book, I mentioned it several times, and I was surprised by the number of emails I received asking about it. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, I decided to investigate this inner voice. Where does it come from? What makes me suddenly think that I don't deserve something, that I'm a bad parent, that I can't take care of things, that men leave me because I'm too dramatic? Where does that negative voice come from that constantly beats us down? So, after listening to countless stories over the years, in my second book, I came up with a theory that I believe is quite plausible, even though it's not scientific, it's my theory. I called it the childhood recorder. And my theory is that when you're born, it's like they implant a microchip in your brain, like a blank cassette tape. Well, my kids would probably call it something else, but let's go with a blank cassette for now. They hit the record button, and it starts recording and recording and recording. What does it record? How your parents treat you, how they treat each other, how people in your closest circle talk about you. This one's a troublemaker, this one won't amount to anything, that one's clumsy, that's the chubby one. I had a patient who told me her mother always said, only skinny girls achieve anything in life. So, she spent her whole life struggling with diets, even though she's slim. But she still feels fat because her mother made her feel that way. She's completely anchored to that statement. So, if anyone starts reflecting on their life and those sometimes negative phrases we tell ourselves, we might suddenly realize it comes from a teacher, a parent, an older sibling, or not to mention, if there has been trauma, bullying, harassment, abuse. These are more serious words, but I mean the everyday stuff. Suddenly, you hear a phrase like, you're not good enough, and that's terrible because it influences and determines the attitude I have towards challenges in life. If I can't overcome that, I tell my patients, what does your inner voice say? Does it say you've failed? Tell me what it says and where that voice comes from. Suddenly, you trace it back to childhood, adolescence, or sometimes a human relationship, like a boss. I remember a patient I have a lot of affection for. He had a normal childhood and everything seemed fine. But his first boss always told him, you're so clumsy, if I don't hire you, no one will. This stuck with him. Then, that boss left the company due to an illness, and when my patient started going for job interviews, he was paralyzed by fear, thinking, I'm clumsy. But where did that belief that you're clumsy come from? He said, well, my boss used to tell me that. So, that boss had the power. We give that power sometimes, willingly or unknowingly. Sometimes it enters on its own, other times we open the door and say, "Come in." Sometimes it's by osmosis or in moments of vulnerability or tension. When you're stressed, your body is in sympathetic nervous system mode, with cortisol levels through the roof. Things enter your mind without you being aware, because the prefrontal cortex functions poorly during survival moments. It integrates things that later, when you reflect, you realize, this entered during a tough time, I was overwhelmed at work, and I didn't even notice it. Why did I let that person treat me so badly? In a survival mode, you don't leave room for your heart. You go into survival mode, and afterward, you might think, did they really treat me like that? Did this really happen to me? Did I handle it that poorly? But at the time, biologically and neurobiologically speaking, your brain didn't allow you to react differently. Returning to my inner voice, which I recommend analyzing, it's not just about how I treat myself. It's about those days when I haven't slept well, and I wake up thinking, you're a mess, you look awful. It's about the days when I'm sad, when I've had an argument with someone, when I'm going to work, or when I encounter a group of people and see them in a certain light. She had a patient who was 42 or 43, and she met up with all her school friends after 2 years. There were about 20 of them, and she was the only one who was single and childless. Throughout the gathering, she kept recalling phrases from past ex-partners who had told her that she was too much or not enough for them. These toxic phrases started to weigh her down during the dinner. She began to see all her friends as her mother, who used to tell her she was different when she was a child, saying, "Do you want to know who will put up with you?" Suddenly, she felt completely overwhelmed, experiencing an anxiety attack. She was writing an email, and I told her, "We need to unblock this." There are techniques I use, such as EMDR, which I explain in my book. I learned this technique in Cambodia, and later I saw a curious psychologist using it with a girl who had experienced a traumatic incident, a terrible story. The girl was suffering panic attacks, and this psychologist used EMDR. So, I thought, if something works, let's investigate it. When it came to Spain, I took the course, got trained, and I've been using it for maybe 10 years now. It unblocks situations. Some might be wondering about the English abbreviation. EMDR stands for Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing. It's a technique involving eye movement that helps reprocess information. I usually explain it to my patients like this: imagine you have a hippocampus, which is like a memory storage unit. It has a communication channel with the amygdala, the center of fear and anxiety management. When you think of, say, Paris, a beautiful and romantic city, it's all fine. Paris goes smoothly into your hippocampus. But then, if you're suddenly stopped on the street, robbed, and your wallet is taken, and your husband has a knife to his throat, your brain starts associating these traumatic events with Paris. So, whenever you think of Paris or see your wallet's brand or even notice the mark on your husband's neck from the knife, your brain triggers a response, and everything starts moving. The issue is that our hippocampus often stores incorrect information, like a partner who hurt you or a parent who didn't love you, or even cases of sexual abuse. I specialize in dealing with trauma, especially abuse cases. What this technique does is that it gradually replaces these incorrect associations with correct ones. It may seem somewhat magical, but the technique involves a relaxation process through eye movements. Research suggests it's related to the rapid eye movement, REM, sleep phase, where information is processed through eye movement. The bottom line is that it's a very effective technique. I recommend it to people dealing with trauma or situations they can't manage well because it has shown success in unblocking these issues in a matter of minutes.